the next part of our session this afternoon is going to be a panel discussion to talk about all things that come with engineering effectiveness. And I'm really happy to be joined by these wonderful people here. Some of them have agreed to be on the panel only at very short notice, which is very lovely of them. But I'll introduce them briefly, and I think we can do another round of what your key expertise is. So we'll start on the side over there. That's Len Garvey. He's an executive manager at REA. He looks after developer productivity tooling, cloud, and all these things. So welcome. Then we've got Bridget O'Brien. She is called an executive partner on her LinkedIn page for Thoughtworks. So I've spent many engagements with Bridget trying to optimize organizations and trying to figure out what it is that holds them back or how they could be more effective delivering digital products and services. We've got Nigel Dalton here. He bills himself as social scientist, though he's a recovering executive, having been involved in a number of different organizations in Australia and New Zealand. And Michelle, you've met, and I'm Heiko. Hello. All right. All right. So I've got the first question, and we're going to start with just whoever blurts out answers, if you'd like. So we talked about system level improvements and making improvements that are not just in a local maximum. How do you visualize that? If you say in an engineering team, how do you visualize that you need to make an improvement that affects more than just your immediate team? Who do you tell? And is there a good way of letting your superiors or your engineering managers or your executive know that it needs improvement on a more systemic level?
I can give a really practical example. Can you hear me? Yes. Visualization is the key, right? And if people can see the problem, then they can understand the magnitude, often the frequency, the likelihood of it, and then think of ways to resolve it. And one thing that we worked with an organisation was a challenge to balance supply and demand, which is always a problem in organisations. How do we know we've got enough work for the teams at the right time? Most organisations really struggle to even understand the need for managing the supply of work the supply of people to the demand for work. And so we visualised it. Not only do we visualise it from a macro sort of portfolio perspective, but we also tried to actually map the work in each of the teams. And in this organisation, there was 60-odd teams, which was really challenging. So we picked the 22 teams that had most of the problem, and we mapped the work and mapped the capacity to demonstrate the excess expectations on those teams and how that then created a larger bottleneck for the rest of the system that needed those teams. That was a big activity, but it was really helpful.
It's a bit like domain theory. The clever bit is establishing the boundaries of where your work comes in and where it goes out. And it's always fun to think one further level out. One of my most absolute all-time favourite trying to remove waste from a team exercises was actually at a bank in New Zealand they were credit card processing people, and they used a lot of software and a lot of processes. And there was a change in the culture of the organisation. They decided that they needed more formal rules, they needed timesheets, they needed all these social changes, as well as new software and code changes. And we encouraged them to map across a long wall the boundary of their world, which was when the credit card order came in from a bank branch, was processed by them in amazing time with all of the different squiggles, and then it stopped. And they were working to a hard service level agreement that was popular back in the old days. Must have it turned around in 36 hours. I asked the curious question of, so when the cards, you've sent it off and the factory's printed, stamped the thing, what happens then? Well, why would we care? And so you're working your asses off to get to a 36-hour chunk across a lot of steps. What happened? Let's find out. And from there, New Zealand Post would take 8 days to send the card out. So why care about 36 hours when the cost of delay was immense to the brand reputation, all those kind of things. So just like domain design, boundaries are key.
I feel like there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who are emotionally driven, and there are people who are emotionally driven but tell everyone that they're driven by data. So in terms of sort of system level optimization, how do you show that? One, you should show the system or the software or the process running in production showcases. They're an amazing kind of thing that you should probably be doing. And the second one is having some kind of KPI, probably like an OKR framework, and that. So therefore, you're going after the people who are emotionally driven. Show them the thing. Show them the user interface that how it tackles the customer need. Or you should show how KR has improved from X to Y, and then therefore you'll get going after both those different groups of people.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Maybe the question is going to come up sooner or later again, so I might as well tackle it head on. Because we talked about it in the Q&A, but so generative AI, are robots going to take all our jobs? I think from our perspective, we told you what we think, but what's your first gut reaction to 52% of development time could be replaced by machines? Paraphrasing, obviously.
I'm biting my lip and I'm going to hand over to my data-driven friend on the end there. Are your team using tools?
We're exploring tools like Copilot for sort of building software. I think that these are trends that every business should be looking at and understanding. My personal belief is that large language models hallucinate, and hallucinations are not what I generally want inside systems where I require availability and reliability and things like that. So therefore, and fundamentally when I think about the hardest problem in software engineering, it's actually understanding the problem. It's while I also believe that spending time optimizing how I write my code is important, the understanding the problem is the hard part. And you're still going to need people who can translate I want this thing for my business into something that a computer does, and whether those people are programming prompts into a large language model or writing C or Java or JavaScript, I think that those jobs are the same thing.
I love that you had the value stream maps up here. The old lean fella in me just fell in love with that, because that's the first step, is understand how your sausage factory works. And if there was a fundamental breakdown in modern business, is a complete lack of appreciation for how a code-dependent business makes its most basic service inside the factory. And if you sit down and draw a value stream map of how work comes in, demand from customers, it gets prioritized, strategized, done, out, delivered and measured, I don't believe that the giant bottleneck lies at the keyboard. And you were really getting to that. And those maps are so easy to do. You only need a few people who are involved in the system to create them. And it's just, this is my absolute frustration at generative AI, is that people have gone and rushed to a shiny new thing and once again distracted themselves from the hard work of knowing how their factory works and where the waste is. Far better investment of your time.
Do you feel threatened by AI, just personally as a developer?
I don't, but I think it's because of the way I've interacted with it so far. I think the way I've interacted with it, I am, I think, confident enough in my own abilities to be able to see where it is confident, but isn't actually doing a good job. My concern is when I need to use it in situations where I am less confident or less maybe skilled in that context, and then I may unwittingly trust it unnecessarily. I think at that point, maybe it's going to take away my job because it will expose to other people that maybe I'm not as good at my job as I thought I was. I've had people come up to me who I think are newer in their career who are quite reliant on Copilot or Code Whisperer, and it kind of scares me a bit because you, I think, need to have a certain level of understanding to be able to identify what is right and what's wrong. And if you don't have that, you could be, I think, led down the garden path a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of like related, not that related, is engineering practices. That's come up before a little bit as well. And I know we talked about like you can't just optimize your practices, you can't just optimize on the local maximum, but like having mature modern engineering practices actually underpins a lot of the other things and what you're trying to do. And that was one of the questions in Slido before that talked about like how do you explain to management or to your executives that you now need to practice continuous integration, for example, right? Like how do you do that? And like if there's a good way that you've come up with, I would be really interested to hear you.
I remember Salid and I used to work together, and he worked in a very difficult area because the stakeholder was absolutely the toughest person in any business to explain how code sausages are made, which is finance. And I think you may well have long forgotten the challenge I put to you was to the day you can explain the economics of pair programming to the CFO, you have made it in technology. How, if you were given that challenge today, or you gave it to some of your team, how would they go? Because literally, I had, as an executive, Owen come up to me one day and go, I do not understand how two people sitting at one keyboard isn't costing me twice as much money.
We've never explained that to the CFO. He's actually now the CEO. And I think that there's like a case of executive majoring the minors. There's so much depth to every function in the office, in the modern workplace, that it's pointless for an executive to understand all of the individual practices of every single function. So if you're in marketing, if you're in social media, and then you're trying to explain to your CEO the latest TikTok meme, it's probably not the most important thing for them to be focused on. Just like, while there might be some value in explaining the continuous integration, continuous delivery provides value to the business and the obvious way to explain this is that I put my thing into production and my customer gives me feedback tomorrow as opposed to next month. That should be immediately obvious to anyone. Generally speaking, there's a lot of things that we do as engineers that are best practice, but require expertise to be able to understand why it is best practice, and I think that's completely okay. We are specialists. You hire us for our specialty, and therefore, with that should come some level of trust that we're doing the right thing. I think as you said earlier, don't measure that individual productivity. It's sort of very much going into that area. So basically, don't try is my answer.
Yeah, I do remember. So when I walked into REA Group in 2012, they're coming off the back of a migration, and I can talk about this one because you weren't there, so you won't call me up on the actual truth. And there was a bit of verbal violence between sales and software engineers over the fact there hadn't been any product development for 2 years, and they were now desperate to get feature after feature after feature changed within the website. And it had resulted in a group of salespeople coming to level 4 to lobby for their features. And it ended up in HR, and it wasn't pleasant, and everyone was uncomfortable. And I took the pragmatic approach of going, okay, I'm going to find one engineer with a little bit of charm, and I'm going to bring 2 of the key protagonists up, and we're going to sit down, and we are going to make and deploy a change. A simple change. We're going to change this box from that colour to that colour. And that sitting in front of a screen and then moving to the next, we're very old-fashioned, that screen to do the code development, this screen to do the integration, and then test it, and then check and go, okay, well, this is also impacting this. And it took maybe 20 minutes before those 2 salespeople went, oh, we see that their requests and demands for change, it wasn't just PowerPoint. It looked like a PowerPoint thing, but people don't know. People literally don't know how it's made, how it's done, and that's the greatest gain.
Well, we talked about getting engineering teams closer to their customers before, right? And in some cases, those customers are also internal stakeholders as well, right? So that actually was going to be my next question. Right? Like we mentioned, get developers to be get development teams to be closer to their customers. Like, what would be a concrete thing that you've seen that has worked to do that?
I've seen as part of an onboarding, like if you start at a new organization, when you start at the organization, it's been a requirement for engineers to sit in with the CX teams to hear customer complaints or how customers are using it, what their struggles are, and I really like that. Another thing that I've seen done well is in onboarding, having the engineers watching the videos that customers get when they are onboarded onto the platform, that kind of thing. Or I think I've also seen like maybe once a sprint, or not once a sprint, maybe once a quarter, just having customers come in and show how they're using the product. And you really see something from a different perspective, because I think similar to if you don't see how the sausage is made, you don't understand the intricacies of it. If you're working in the code all the time and you are so focused on changing the thing or getting a feature out, you forget that there's someone on the other side actually using it. And once I think you actually see a person, it makes your work seem so much more alive, and you see things from their perspective. And I think if you actually have that interaction, it brings it much closer to you.
Yeah, I've seen a team that's used similar techniques to that, as well as real-time analytics based on customer usage of the app. And they said, and they had from the start been so heavily involved that they said, we actually don't need a product owner because we just know what's going on with the customers. We know how to prioritise ourselves. We know how to do the everything that we need to get it out to the customers. And that's actually really the first and only time I've seen a team that has been so connected with the customer that they sort out on a daily basis the analytics about usage. They made really pragmatic decisions about what that meant to the work that they were doing and what they needed to prioritise. And that was super powerful, and it's something that I really wish happened more. Yeah.
There's like a nuance there, and that is, we talked about internal platform teams as well, and like also the need to also take a product-centric approach to them. So I'd be really interested to hear about what you've been doing around that at REA as well.
I lead two large teams inside REA, Realtime.com.au. One of them is our data services team, so they look at data platforms, how data moves around the business, how it gets stored. And the other one is the space team, which thinks about cloud engineering, developer effectiveness, and things like that. We have a lot of different platform products, and it can be really challenging for platform teams to understand, one, who their customers are, particularly if those customers are internal, because there's always this tension as to sort of like, is an internal customer truly a customer? Because on some level, I, as in me or my boss, the CTO, can mandate that the rest of the company uses the platform product. That's not really a customer sort of relationship. That's something else. So it's really important that we implement true kind of product thinking and a customer-focused mindset, and really understand that the people who are outside of our central platform teams, they are separate to us, and they should want to use the things that we build. So we've been on this big journey of creating these tools that people across the business sometimes love to use, sometimes are encouraged to use. And we've been developing frameworks to help support those use. We also have developed an internal brand, which we call Collab, which helps support the adoption and support those products internally. There's lots of challenges with these things, but these strategies that we've been using have been quite effective. So the most recent thing that I've been working on has been this sort of change of our, what I guess is a traditional SRE team towards more of a product-focused team, and that's really starting to bring in a more customer-focused view of the world to probably one of the last areas inside REA that is not as product-driven. REA has been at the forefront of product delivery for quite a number of years now. So that's what we've been doing. We've got lots of products. We've got an internal brand name. We measure the adoption and the usage of those products. We talk about them to the executive, and we justify their funding, and we do all those things. And we've got objectives and key results and all sorts of stuff that floats around how our internal platforms are built. It's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good.
Now, we became quite well known for our hack days, and my reflection on all of those was that did give others an opportunity to see how the engineering profession worked. And the downside of it was that they were hack days, so it wasn't real professional code you'd ever want to deploy, but it bridged that gap between people actually seeing someone sit at a screen and start to understand how the craft was created.
Just ship the hack product, Nigel.
I think we did it once and regretted that forever.
Great. Some audience questions as well. And I like this one a fair bit. All the things we've been talking about, does it only apply to custom software delivery, or does engineering effectiveness also apply similarly to low-code, no-code platforms, or just packaged software delivery? I guess I can start.
We've got someone on the team who's deployed Salesforce and NetSuite and tons of package. Is that effective?
At some scale, those low-code, no-code products are actually just software development platforms in disguise. So yes, all of the same tools apply. The challenge is that a lot of the techniques that we like to use, I think you put up some really great sort of practices, Thoughtworks practices. It can be really difficult to do TDD when you're working inside if you're shipping code into Salesforce, because Salesforce isn't well set up to do TDD, as an example. But yes, all of your standard things apply, and you should be trying as hard as you possibly can to follow good engineering practice. It pays off. It might not look like it pays off immediately because your first feature is slower, but your 100th or your 150th is much, much faster.
Yeah, I've also seen it pay off really well when you pick products to also think about some of those concerns and how they support more effective engineering practices as well, even before you start the purchase order, if that makes sense. It makes a big difference, and there's also some architectural tricks you can apply, like anti-corruption layers, things that make things more agile. But yeah, I completely agree as well. It's not just because it's a packaged software problem in your organization doesn't mean that it doesn't equally affect you and your organization if there are bottlenecks or if there's big approval flows, for example.
I think the tendency of Australian companies to offshore huge chunks of that stuff without thinking hard about it and just thinking, okay, the boundary is done, I never need to think about the cost of whether those people are effective or not has created some legendary crises in Australian business where it's just an accounting package. I can have that run by a team in Manila. And then that suddenly does become the bottleneck around something more complex like product change, pricing change, those kind of things. So I don't believe you can outsource outsource in that sense. That's a whole different game.
Unless you're also able to outsource the risk. Because usually when you outsource something to Manila or anywhere else in the world, you outsource the activity, but you don't get to then have that other company also absorb all the risk of doing the business, because then they would also take all the profit. So, yeah.
Does make sense, yeah. Also adds to fragmentation, right? Because you never only have one sales force, you always have 12, and then you find 3 others somewhere.
I resemble that remark.
It's not just Salesforce, it's everything else as well, so I'm not picking on them. There's a couple of upvotes on people wanting to hear Nigel's version of the CFO pair programming question.
It's very good, and I'm well practiced at it now. Number one, it's the best metaphor ever is driver and co-driver in a rally car going very fast across an unknown territory. It's a very visual thing, and it immediately, oh, okay, yeah, I see two brains can be better than one, but only one steering wheel. And the other one is something that Thoughtworks has worked on at some length, is the actual cost of owning code over 5 to 8 years. And if you are able to track that, and it's hard to do, you will find that code created in a pair with attention to the 9 practices that Thoughtworks is so keen on costs you an awful lot less to change over that time. And I still think the number is something mad, like 75 or 80% of the cost of owning code will occur after you've deployed it to production the first time. Does that ring at all true with your experience, do you reckon? So it's about the cost of change later is worth investing in earlier?
If anything, you should want it to be even more of that, more than that, because we all, the successful case is that the software that I ship today will be in production for hopefully 20 years' time, and I legitimately mean that. Like the older systems at REA that are still running today are legitimately 20 years old, and they have powered one of the most greatest successes of the Australian startup scene ever. And we look at them now and go, oh my God, the legacy. Yeah. But, oh my God, wouldn't you love that legacy in every company? Really? So you should be planning for and hoping for that your software is in production for a very long time. If it's in production for a very short amount of time, it probably means that it's failed and you've ripped it out.
Yeah, we had a very strong debate had to be had with auditors, because I'd been Captain Agile and gone, oh no, software changes all the time, and by 3 years down the line, this will be refactored 4 times. And an accountant went, well, if that's the case, we have to write it down, because that's a value of an identifiable asset delivering a stream of benefits over time. And I went, okay, I didn't mean that. And so we went and checked. And do you know what? We had 5-year-old features, we had 8-year-old features, so yeah, I'm not surprised some of those things. And so code lasts way longer than you think. It's so worth having effective engineering up front to cut the long-term cost of ownership.
I've got a question about testing and test strategy, to go back to be more technical. How does testing and test strategy impact effective engineering teams?
Test strategy in the context of should we write tests? Should we test at all?
I guess that's a good start. I think that would have an impact, yes. But quality strategy in general, absolutely from my experience. Because as Nigel just said, you find a lot more. The cost of finding defects later on in the development lifecycle is a lot higher than finding them earlier. So having a proper way of defining your test strategy, component level testing, integration testing, and a proper way to promote changes through is probably one of the most important things that you can do to improve your effectiveness. Because finding things a lot earlier than in production or in a UAT environment is really paramount to what you're doing. So yeah, absolutely. I would think that is high up there with any engineering practice as well.
For me, testing is much more about confidence, and it's about confidence of change. So we just spoke about you should expect that your software stays in production for a long time, and you should be expecting that you will make change to it. If both of those things are true, it means you've got successful products. Testing allows me to make change confidently. If I don't have tests, if you have no tests on our product, then we can't make changes very confidently, and then innovation is going to fall behind the curve, and we are eventually going to die as a product. So our tests are critical for effectiveness, because effectiveness is about producing value, and we want to be able to produce value quickly. To do that, we need confidence.
We're the victims of a lot of fashion in this, and I, as 20 plus years in the agile world, I've heard, we don't need BAs anymore. We don't need project managers anymore. No, we don't need QA anymore because the developers write all the tests, and we don't need that. We don't need test strategy anymore. That's what did in the olden days. And I think every time we hear those things now, we need to question them and go, is it a process factor? Is it just we don't have enough money to hire all those people, or what's driving that conversation?
And I think we've got time for one more question. And I like this one that the audience has put in. Should we be thinking about efficiency and effectiveness together or separately? What do you prioritize? Efficiency, so input and output, or effectiveness or outcome? What do you think?
I'll have a crack. My gut says you need some sense of the things that are contributing to both of those things in your organisation, but ultimately you don't really trade off one for the other. To be successful, you actually need to be addressing both at the same time. But you do need to understand what is contributing to those things so that you have the data to be able to manage them, really.
I feel like oftentimes we think about efficiency, I think, in individual terms, and a lot of what we've heard today is talking about effectiveness in sort of a team dynamic, effectiveness in producing value at sort of maybe a team or at a company level. I believe that you need both, and I really do like to think about efficiency in sort of like how I, as a developer, might be optimizing my own workflow, and then effectiveness is to how I'm matching up my own value delivery or my team's value delivery with what the company or the environment needs, which is my effectiveness. So I think if you just said you kind of need both of them, which is a really unsatisfactory answer, it'd be great to just say I just need one. But I really like to think about what are those small things that I can be doing as a developer to improve my day-to-day, get really efficient at building any software, and then how do I become effective at building the right software? So yeah.
All right. I think that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining me.